Hi everyone, I'm here today to talk to you about all of the books that I read in December. I will list the titles in the description box down below. I didn't read as much as I had planned to in December. I was just a bit all over the place reading wise. We all have those months, or sometimes longer than months, and that's absolutely fine. So let me talk to you about the books that I read. I will talk to you first about the audiobook so that I don't forget it, and that was The Crow Trap by Anne Cleeves. This is the first in the Vera Stanhope mystery series, and I've been looking for a female-led detective series to read, having finished the Frida Klein series nearly a year ago. Over a year ago? You know how much I love them. I've been trying out other female detective series and seeing if I can find something that I love as much. I don't think I'm going to love this one as much, but I'm definitely going to continue with the series and see where it goes. A lot of people, when I mentioned that I was reading it, said they much prefer the TV series to the books, which is interesting, but I am enjoying the books for now, and I'll definitely check out the TV series at some point. I was particularly drawn to listening to the audiobooks of these because they're set in the Northeast, which is where I'm from, and therefore it just, whilst also making me homesick, made me really happy to have all these voices in my ears that were speaking in Geordie and Mackem accents, and I could picture everything that they were talking about, the farmlands, but also they were talking about, Northumberland Street in Newcastle, and I'm like, I know where that is. I've walked up and down there millions of times before. It's really comforting to read something set in a place that you're very familiar with, and hearing those accents in my brain was just lovely. So I think that lent itself to my particular enjoyment. I'm not sure that's something that would necessarily make it more enjoyable to you. The book focuses on three women who have been hired to do a conservation report. So they don't know each other very well, and they're centered at this place called Bakey's, which is a cottage in the middle of nowhere. They're each being hired for specific things. They each have a speciality when it comes to conservation, and they have been asked to do a report for this company to assess whether or not a quarry expanding into the area would cause devastation, or whether or not there's not much to protect in this area of the countryside. And when they get there, a fourth person who was supposed to be working with them, who is a friend of some of the characters, has died. So they are trying to do their report whilst working out why their friend potentially killed themselves, but then other things are going on at the same time. Because it's a Vera Stanhope mystery novel, I assumed that we would start with the detective and it would be centered on her and how she was investigating what's going on, but it's not like that at all. We begin with these three women, with Rachel, Anne and Grace, and we go between them for, I would say, 3/4 of the book, learning about them, and not only the work that they're doing on this conservation, but also about their entire lives. And we're only introduced to Vera about 2/3 of the way through. She only gets her own chapter on chapter 50 something. So this book really is a character study of these three women, and not particularly centered around the crime at all, apart from at various crucial points. So I enjoyed that quite a lot. I found it surprising, but I was very happy to just let this book take me wherever it wanted to take me. I'm not sure it's a favourite, but I'm going to continue with the series and see what the second book is like. Next, I read Miss Benson's Beetle by Rachel Joyce, which is her 5th novel, her 6th book, because she also has a short story collection out. She's most well known for her novel The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, which came out in 2012. I've read all of her books, and I've recorded a podcast with Rachel before, which I'll link in the description box down below. If you're looking for, I would say, a book that feels like a radio play, a cozy radio play, a book that feels like The Archers, then you will really enjoy her books. And you can tell that Rachel writes for radio. I think that's what she did before she started writing novels. She's very good at character conversation and relationships, and really tapping into a few key things that bring characters to life. And she has some devastating lines in her book that tug at your heartstrings. So at the beginning, when she's talking about her father, it says he closed the door gently behind him as if it had feelings. You know, just lovely sentences like that, which really capture something that feels very, very true. In this book, Miss Benson, who I think is in her 50s or her 60s, she really wants to escape her life. This is set in the 1950s. She is an underappreciated teacher, and she wants to leave her school. She wants to travel all the way across the world to try and find this beetle, which she has read about, and it's almost legendary, mythological. It's like a quest, a cryptozoology quest. She wants to go to New Caledonia and try and find this golden beetle. So she places an advert in the paper for someone to come on this expedition with her, and she gets an unlikely person to come with her who's called Enid Pretty, who is trying to escape for a whole other different reason. And this book is very hilarious. There are parts of it that remind me of My Family and Other Animals by Gerald Durrell. It's delightful. I spoke about this more over on Patreon because it was our autumn Patreon book club pick. So you can go on over there to hear my full thoughts. The one downside of this book and books like it is I feel that because it's quite cozy, and even though it does get into difficult subjects occasionally, there are sometimes stereotypical things that it can fall into with regard to queerness and disability, and that frustrated me a little bit, but I still really loved the book and it gave me all of the warm fuzzies, though I can't forgive her for the ending, and I won't say more than that. Speaking of disability, in December I read this, which is Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary Resilient Disabled Body by Rebekah Taussig, and I adored this with all of my heart. And if there is one book, I'm just checking for the other books that I read in December, if there's one book that I would encourage you to pick up from the books that I read in December, it is this one right here. It is the best book on disability and ableism that I have ever read. It is a must read, and the audiobook is also brilliant because Rebekah narrates it herself. I don't really know how to talk about this book without just reading huge chunks of it out to you. Rebekah is a disabilities studies lecturer, and she writes in this about her experience as a lecturer and how vulnerable that can be, talking, and powerful in places too, but lecturing from an own voice's perspective is obviously very powerful, but it means that you, if you're teaching to non-disabled students, become their point of reference if they don't have personal points of reference in their own lives. It can get personal really quickly, and boundaries can be blurred, and that can be really awkward and also upsetting because that power imbalance is warped. She also talks about capitalism and ableism. She talks about the complicated nature of kindness. She talks about inner circles and sharing stories, and how it's great to do that, but how she hasn't really found, until a certain point, a circle where she feels like she can really share stories that are understood. So she gives an example. She's at a party and she's with a group of women, and they're all talking about being catcalled on the street and how awful that is and inappropriate. And she agrees with that, and she knows that that's inappropriate. And then she has this really conflicting feeling because she remembers a time when she was catcalled, when because Rebekah is a wheelchair user, and she remembers being in her wheelchair and being catcalled and recognizing, yes, that's not something that I really want, but also relishing it at the same time because she had got that attention. And I think we've all felt that actually at various points in our lives, that conflicting feeling of being sexualized even when we don't want to, but recognizing, or at least some part of us recognizing that that's what society wants us to be grateful for, and internalizing that and not really understanding it, and at the same time kind of hating ourselves a little bit. All of these misplaced emotions, or maybe that's unfair, not misplaced emotions, but emotions that society has tagged incorrectly in our brain. So she didn't feel as though she could really talk about that with these non-disabled women because she felt that they wouldn't understand. That was one particular instance, and she gives so many different examples that are just so brilliant and illustrate her points so well. I have never read a book where I have felt more seen or understood than reading this book. And that may sound ridiculous because Rebekah's disability and my disability are very different. But it was just a joy to read. I just wanted to shout yes a lot when reading it. And I read this book, it had been on my horizon anyway, but I read it because I was hosting an event with Rebekah, and that was also such a joy, talking to her about her experience of writing this book, but also how things have changed, because she finished writing this book right at the beginning of 2020, and since then she's had a child and there's been a global pandemic. So we had lots of things to talk about with regard to the treatment of disabled people during a pandemic, but also being pregnant during a pandemic and having a baby, not only just in general, but also again as a disabled person. It was a wonderful discussion, and I'm afraid it's not public for you to watch, but if I ever get the chance to do a public event with Rebekah again, I would grab that opportunity so hard. Please, please read it. Another cozy crime that I read in December was Somebody at the Door by Raymond Postgate. I actually spoke about this in a reading vlog where I was doing sample readings from some of the British Library crime classics. So I'll link that up here and down below. I enjoyed this, but it did drag for me. The premise of this book is that a man gets on a train at Euston Station during the Blitz, so the lights are all down low. He's travelling home after work, and he talks about every person in his carriage. He gets off the train, he walks home, and when he gets home, he collapses. He has been exposed to mustard gas and he dies, and the inspector has to try and work out what happened. Each chapter focuses on a different passenger on that train carriage. And what I really loved about this book, and also I think was its slight downfall, is that each passenger had done something, but not necessarily relating to this man. Each of them had committed a crime, and so they all had something to hide, and they were all acting really suspiciously. Like, one person had even killed somebody else completely outside of this story. There was drama everywhere. But that did mean that every chapter was quite long. There was one which took up about a third of the book in the centre and wasn't related to what was going on. And by the time you've read a whole, basically a mini crime novel within a crime novel, and you get back to the actual plot of the book that you're reading, you've forgotten what's happened because you've read a short version of this entire other book. So that meant that this book felt a little bit all over the place to me. I enjoyed certain chapters more than others. It did, as I say, drag in places. The reveal was all right, but I had guessed it. So I liked it, didn't love it, but still looking forward to reading more from this crime series. They're all by different authors. This is Acorn Cove. This is a graphic novel, and like the Tea Dragon Society, this will just warm your heart. This is about a young girl who goes to visit her aunt on the coast. They have recently suffered a storm and she's helping repair their houses. Her mother has recently died, so she is dealing with that grief, but also climate grief. This is about the climate crisis and about how this particular village, and also society as a whole, is taking too much from the sea. And there are these magical creatures that live in the sea who come to visit this girl and her aunt and tell her, you're doing too much, you're damaging us, we need to work together. I think this is actually a really great graphic novel to give to 7-, 8-year-olds and older. I mean, I'm a 33, soon to be 34-year-old lady, and I enjoy this very much, but to introduce them or go alongside the stuff that they currently already know about the climate crisis. And also, as I said, about grief. It's got a lot packed in here, and all of those subjects are dealt with in really fantastic ways. Also, like with the Tea Dragon Society, the illustration work in here is flippin' adorable, and there's great queer representation in it as well. Oh, and at the back, I should say, once you finish reading the story, it tells you about coral reefs and what's happening to them, and then also what you could do to help, and where you can find out more information, which I think is a really, really great addition too. The other book by Kay that I read was Dewdrop, and this one is a picture book, and it is about an axolotl called Dewdrop. Again, the illustration in here is just very, very cute. All of the undersea creatures, underwater creatures of the sea, are preparing for a talent contest, and Dewdrop doesn't know what he's good at, but he knows that he's really good at cheerleading. So he goes around encouraging people to try hard at doing the things that they love. And in doing that, he realizes that that's what he's good at doing too. It's so sweet. This is obviously for younger readers. I would say it's great for maybe 4+. I also read another picture book. This is The Little Girl Who Was Afraid of Everything by Aurora Cacciapuoti. Now, this book I think had a bit of an unfortunate release date because I think it came out at the beginning of 2020, and it is about, let me check that. Yeah. And it is about a young girl who is afraid of everything. She is afraid of going to the park because of what if she gets hit by a swing, or she's afraid of gardening because what if she gets bitten by a creature in the ground. So she has a lot of anxiety. And had this book not come out during the pandemic, I would say this is a great book to give to kids who have anxiety about doing certain things, because it's really encouraging, and she gets to nurture a part of herself at the end, and do some things that are outside of her comfort zone, but recognize the joy in that, whilst also respecting her insecurities and listening to herself. But because there is a pandemic on, and I'm sure, well, I know a lot of children are feeling a lot more anxiety than they were before, but it's not misplaced anxiety. Like, they're anxious about a pandemic, which is fair enough. This perhaps is not a great book to thrust into children's hands, being like, see, it's absolutely safe to go and hang out with everyone and do whatever you want, and there are no consequences. Let's say this is a great book for later, when the world is a safer place and there are fewer restrictions, but those anxieties then are still there, and children are worried because all of these restrictions have been in place and they're finding it difficult to adapt back into normal society, which is completely understandable. And I'm sure that there will be so much of that, not just for kids, for all of us. So when that time comes, I think this book would be brilliant for then. So bookmark this, you know, for later, I would say. And finally, a lovely book that I read in December was Tiny Moons, A Year of Eating in Shanghai by Mingya Powles. I have read some of her poetry before. I'm still reading her book, Magnolia. I've been savouring it. This is a non-fiction book about food, specifically her year living in Shanghai and all of the food that she ate there. It's split into seasons, and the way that she talks about food, I ate so much when I read this book. Even though it's only 100 pages, I had to keep putting it down and then going to make myself snacks, because she has such an affectionate way of talking about food that I share with all of my soul. And I've recently been cooking a lot of Chinese food from a book called Dumplings and Noodles, which you may have seen on my Instagram stories, cooking Josie and stuff like that. And lots of different buns, steamed buns. It's been such a great time. And a lot of that has been because I miss a lot of food that I can't go into town and eat, but also because I've been reading this book and it's made me so hungry. And then I've had to take, you know, 3 hours out of my weekend to go and make the food that she's talking about. It's just brilliant. So if you are into food writing, this one is a delight. I would love to know if you have read any of these, and also what you read last month as well. The next video that I upload will be my favourite books of 2020, which will be up in the next few days. I hope you're all doing okay, and I will speak to you very soon. Lots of love. Bye.